We are live on YouTube. It is Friday. It's time for KTLO.
Yay, Friday.
Friday, yay, Friday. And it is episode, say it with me, 42.
43? No, 41. 40. See, I'm searching for that answer.
It's 42. It's episode 42.
I feel like after 41 episodes, we may have the answer to life and everything.
Yeah. No, we don't. We don't even come close. However, we do have a lovely roundup of people here, and we're going to have guests today. They're filing into the waiting room even as we speak. We'll be letting them in a moment or two. But before we get there, we'll just say, what's the topic for today? It's episode 42. If this is the answer, what's the question? And there's our little light bulb guy, our logo light bulb. Maybe that should be his name, Logo Light Bulb. And he's standing outside the rooms with question marks saying, what?
Logo or Logie?
Is it meaningful that in the KTLO logo, it's a European plug, and in the
what can I say?
a North American plug? I'm just saying.
No, see, that's actually not a North American. Well, it's a North American plug that goes into the European plug that goes into the European socket that goes into the.
All about having an adapter.
I don't know.
Socket, not sprocket.
That's it. And so, who are these people and what are they doing on our screen?
Can't you?
It is definitely Friday. We have Patty Blackstaff. Hello, Patty.
Good morning.
We have Greg Sanker. Hi, Greg.
Morning, everybody.
We have Simone Jo Moore.
Bon après-midi à tous.
See, it's afternoon for her because she's in France. We have people in 3 different countries, 2 different continents right here. And that's just the core 4. We didn't get to the rest of the people who are going to be here today. So, wow. If you want to get in touch with any of us, here's the information. We're all on Twitter. We're all on LinkedIn. We have a little website that can tell you more about what the heck is this thing you're watching. What is this thing? What is this thing called KTLO? So, but do not be afraid. We're here.
That's one we haven't actually had an answer for yet, isn't it?
We're here.
What is that thing?
We have a different answer to the question every week, but this is all about questions and answers today. There's the answer match the question. What's the question? How do you frame the question? Why is the question? And this is part of season 3 here at KTLO, episode 42. We started this season with episode 40, and our format includes having an interviewer for each episode. And so today we are going to have our interviewer du jour as Patty Blackstaff. And so, Patty, I'm going to hand it over to you. I'm going to let our guests in from the waiting room, and we'll get this party started.
Well, good morning, everyone. I'm glad that we're going to be letting people in because it's always much more exciting when we have all of our friends here to throw in some questions and answers of their own and thoughts. And so as you let people in, I'm going to say good morning to all of you. I have a coaching practice that I've been doing for quite some time. And when we talk about questions, that is the biggest question on a coach's mind is, am I asking the right questions? So this is going to be a fun day today. Good morning, Kathy. How are you this morning?
Fantastic. How are you?
Good, thanks. Good, thanks. Who else do we have in our lineup, Roy?
Well, we did have Daniel Breston. However, he seems to have vanished out of the waiting room here. If I can find him, I'll let him in.
Kathy, you're wearing your pearls today.
I wore my pearls today. Do you know why?
Why?
Pearls and chucks. You know, other countries have had female leaders, but we finally have one in, and there's something about pearls and chucks. And I have to still look it up, but I wore my pearls for her today.
So the pearls are for Shirley Chisholm, who was the first female candidate for president.
Thank you.
And the first Black woman elected to the U.S. Congress. And the Chuck Taylors are for Kamala Harris.
Oh, thank
Who
you.
makes a habit
Nice.
of wearing Chuck Taylors. So
Are
that's
you?
the story behind those.
So together we've got it.
There you go.
All right. Good morning, Daniel. Nice to see you. Thanks for joining us today. We're talking about questions and answers. We don't know that we have any of the answers or the questions, but we're going to work our way through today. One of the things that really hit me today or this week was it was interesting. We planned this episode, and then all of a sudden this week, I'm on a global coaching summit, I guess you'd call it, and Hal Gregerson was on there, and he's the ultimate question guy, and he started it off by saying, notice that the word question has the word quest inside of it, which is a search for something, and sometimes it's over a long period. So a question that is a worded phrase that is supposed to elicit information as we ask and seek. That means we're looking for something. We're looking to solve the accusation. The accusation, which is a challenge that we're faced with. So Roy's nodding his head because he knows that's where the word challenge comes from, because he's our linguistic genius. So today I kind of wanted to start off with a quote by Voltaire. Judge a man by his questions rather than by his answers. So here we go. Roy, I'm going to start with you. I'm going to throw something at you. Why is the relationship between questions and answers so important?
Well, as we should know, all of us from taking multitudes of tests as we go through life for school and for jobs and everything else, so many times the answer is in the question, right? It's in the question. The example that I usually use for the importance of the relationship between the answer and the question is a logic problem. Probably most students who have gone through philosophy classes or anything like that run across this particular problem at some point. And it has to do with, let's say you find yourself on an island. And on this island, there are two tribes of people. One tribe is a tribe that always, always, always tells the truth. They cannot lie. All right. The other tribe is a tribe of liars who cannot ever tell the truth. Everything they say is a lie. They cannot tell the truth. So you're going across this island and you don't know anybody there. You don't know how to identify the different tribes. And you come to a fork in the road, and in the middle of the fork in the road, there is someone standing there. And you're trying to get to the big city. You have to get to the big city. So you have to come up with a question. You have to formulate a question that you can ask that person who's standing at the fork in the road that will either always tell the truth or always lie. And you have to be able to elicit the correct direction to the city, no matter which tribe they belong to. And so I'm just going to tell you, if you ever run into this logic problem, if somebody asks you a silly question like this, you can tell, you'll know the answer. So the answer is, you have to phrase your question this way. If I were to ask you which way to go to get to the big city, what would you tell me? And so the person who always lies has to lie not only about which way it is to the big city, but they have to lie about what they would tell you if you asked them which way to the big city. Therefore, they have to tell you the way to the big city, right? They have to lie about what they would say and lie about which way to the big city. It's two lies making the truth. The other person who always tells the truth is going to point to the way to the big city. So you get the answer no matter which type of person you're dealing with. So the importance of the relationship between the answer and the question there should be pretty obvious. You have to phrase that question very carefully to elicit the answer that you need to get. And lawyers are very good at that, by the way. The other thing I'm going to point to is salespeople. And there's a very simple sales technique. It's pretty basic. And it is asking the question so that the answer is always yes. You want to always elicit a yes, and you ask questions repeatedly of the customer. Wouldn't you like a great car? Well, yes. Wouldn't you like it to be less expensive? Why, yes. And you answer yes, 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 yes. Now, do you want this car? And of course, the first thing that falls out of your mouth is yes. And bingo, you've got yourself a new car, whether you really wanted one or not. So there is a very interesting and important relationship between the answer and the question. And these are kind of lightweight examples that I used, but it's important to make sure that you're asking the right question to frame the answers that you need to get.
I've seen a few engagement surveys. Well structured with the kinds of questions to elicit the answer they would like to get. Simone, what is it with this need we seem to have to actually work with people who desire to chase the answer before they even truly know the question?
Roy is madly waving at me there. Actually, I'll just pick up on something you said, because as he was telling that story, I'm thinking, how good is it that we tell stories, have stories for our children to explain how to work these things out? Alice in Wonderland and the twins. One tells the lies, one tells the truth. And it's really quite interesting how, we've got those sorts of tools to aid us, yet we forget the outcomes of some of these stories and why it's important to ask the questions. One of my favorite quotes, Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, since we are talking about the answer is always 42, is one of Marvin's quotes. This is all going to end in tears. So if we're only searching for the answers, that's where I think we're going to end up. Now, either Marvin or his programmers were Irish, I think, because remember what Murphy was actually an optimist. And that's a real fact. It's a real fear factor for most people, because I think to be all-knowing means that we're able to fear nothing. But of course, that's actually a myth. So the search for just answers, it is just a myth. Think of the game show Jeopardy. Do you guys you remember Jeopardy? And look, really, really smart show, because you pose an answer and have to ask the people to guess the right question, regardless of the context in which that person is in. So there are clever questions that actually match an answer, and there are clever questions that challenge the answer. Yet all of those questions could be correct. They could be a match for that answer. So I think if you observe that show really well, you'll see who the true thinkers are and where the complexity dwells by the types of questions that they will put to those answers. And I think for most of us, it's, in really scary moments that jar us to move forward and out of procrastination is when we need to ask a question. Because Marvin also says, and I think this relates to many of our current answer issue phenomenons that we have, around emotional AI, that sort of thing. And he says, where's the kaboom? There's supposed to be an earth-shattering kaboom. There's the kaboom. But however, the kaboom is not always what we might expect it to be. So that's, it's a tricky chicken and egg question, isn't it?
Well, and I think that we have a tendency to judge questions, right? We tend to judge them a little bit, but I think I'd rather have questions that can't be answered than answers that can't be questioned. And that's a typical leadership thing. That quote is by Richard Feynman. And I think, Greg, isn't the road less traveled, at least in part, learning and discovery? Isn't it more about learning and discovery, and possible that the answer can actually clarify what the question is sometimes?
So that's a really deep question for this early in the morning. You know that, right? We might need to bring Roy in on this one. Yeah, I do actually. I mean, there's kind of this anti-establishment thing of like, we only go down a path that we know exactly where we're going to go and how we're going to get there. And so when you talk about if this is the answer, then what's the question? Some of some of that causes organizations to swing over and say, look, we know exactly where we're going. We know exactly where we're going to, how we're going to get there. Just, chart the course. But we know increasingly in a complex system that we don't necessarily know. In fact, we may not even know where we're going. This is, it's, if I'm an artist and I start throwing paint at the wall just to see what happens, right? That might create something really stunning. But if I'm a house painter and I've been hired to paint a living room, throwing random colors of paint at the wall is probably not achieving the goal. So I imagine the homeowner coming in and going, if this is your answer to why we engaged you, then what did you think you were here to do? And I think that's where we do need to discuss, what is it that we're trying to achieve? What is it that you want in the end of the day? What is it that you hope to accomplish? Then I can be creative about solving that. So I do think that there is, there is the need to question, and there's the need to answer, and we need to make sure that the two are connected. Usually answers that seem odd in light of the question probably means we're making an awful lot of assumptions. When you said we're going to, do something, we're going to go to the store. Oh, I thought you meant get in the car and go to the store. You meant walk 5 miles and go to the store. Those are two very different things, right? So I think that's part of the discovery.
So in organizations, often we will identify that we need a solution. And we look at the solution so hard that we fail to ask the questions that will help us. Because Greg, what you talked about was, I don't know what I don't know. And anyone who's been in consulting for a long time will recognize that they go into an organization and the solution sits up here because it's already been defined before the questions have been asked in order to get us there. And so the reason we're here today is to try and challenge a little bit about how we approach questions and how the questions can help, and what we can do as IT people, as leaders, as employees within companies to start formulating the kinds of questions that will help us know what we don't know. So I think I'm going to move to Roy, because I'd like him to tell me if there's an example he knows that shows the importance of the question-answer relationship.
I think the easy example is one we're all familiar with, which is that when you take a math exam, and they ask you one of those lovely questions like, if there's 36 gallons of gas in the tank and Jack takes 3 away, how long will it be before they take Jack away? No, a math problem. And train going to Chicago at 36 miles an hour, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And you just write down 21. Like our reference to Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy today, 42. It's meaningless unless you can show the work that got you to that answer. And so you show how the answer flows out of the question that's posed to you. And sometimes it's not enough just to have an answer. You need to explain how you got to that answer. So the question oftentimes has multiple facets. And as I said at the beginning, sometimes the question contains the answer, or at least strong indications of what the answer might be if there are multiple choices, right? So the question can contain clues to the answer. And that's really one of the things we should be looking for.
Simone, I saw you waving your hands.
I was just thinking about the whole showing how you got there thing, and what it reminds me of, and this is why my husband stops asking me questions now, because we'd be in the car driving along and we'd be having a conversation, and all of a sudden I'm on a topic that could be a zillion steps away from what we were talking about. And he goes, how did you just get from this to that? And I said, are you really asking me? He says, yes. And so I would start the whole process step by step. I would say, well, this reminded me of when, and then that color. And that color then reminded me of that moment at the time when we were doing this. And then while we were doing that, that then reminded me of so on and so forth. And it could be 20 odd steps, but I could actually show exactly how I got to the other topic just through context. And that, I think, is why you have to show you're working at work, why you have to show how did you come to that decision, because it has to have context.
Absolutely. Context matters in ways that oftentimes we, in our desire to solve something quickly, we fail to dig deep enough for that context. And sometimes we ask a question and then we find out, if we ask enough questions, that we get back to the road of, oh, we were asking the wrong question to begin with. Greg, isn't it true that kind of best practices are often applied without considering the problem you're trying to solve?
Why do you pick on me for best practices? Jeez. Yeah, I do. I think it happens all the time, but I don't want to limit the discussion to just best practice. I mean, how many fads have swept through this industry? Quality circles, Lean Six Sigma, 1 Minute Manager, the whole employee ranking where the bottom 5% or 10 or whatever needs to go out. It's like there's lots of these things have swept through, and everybody's doing them. And it's not necessarily that the practice themselves are bad or wrong. It's just that when you apply them where they don't fit, or it's a solution to a problem that you don't have, or that your culture or your circumstances or your unique situation that you're in your organization or you personally or whatever is, then it's solving a problem that you don't have. And that's more of what I think we're driving at here with the, if this is the answer, if DevOps, Agile, Lean Six Sigma is the answer, then what is the question, right? So these are all tools that we apply to solve specific problems, generally in a specific context, and they have to be applied expertly to actually address the problem. So have we established that accelerated delivery of value to customers in a software context, internally developed software, is that our top problem? If so, then there's a number of ways that we can do that. Do we need stability or cost containment within infrastructure management or security, FedRAMP certification or whatever? I mean, there's a lot of things out there that we can do depending on the problem they're trying to solve. And if we don't understand what those actual problems or constraints or requirements are, then we have no chance of solving it.
I agree. Without an intent and a challenge, we don't even know what questions to ask. So how can we apply a platform or a framework to it, right? It's that intent and challenge. That's where we start. And then we begin asking all the questions. But I'm hired as a senior leader in an IT organization, and I'm supposed to walk into the office quickly. And Kathy mentioned this in our chat, that how do you make decisions quickly and still have time to ask all the right questions? Simone, why do we burn for those answers before we've even asked the questions?
Oh, and we really do, don't we? We're really anxious to have them. I think often it's because if we ask a question, we don't want to look or feel stupid because of not knowing something. Quite often we can be embarrassed by not knowing something, so we hesitate to want to ask the question. And one of the things I have discovered, especially when I was quite young, when I asked all these sorts of questions, I was told, don't ask stupid questions. But it took me a long time to understand and realize it wasn't the questions that were actually stupid. And nor was the person that told me this. It was actually just their fear talking. And when someone doesn't have an answer, they will usually attack the question being asked. They will use other words. They'll often come to it saying, well, this is a given, or hey, as a matter of fact, or how could you already not know this? So they'll answer a question with a question. without really providing the answer itself. And another approach often used is digital hoarding or e-hoarding, cyber hoarding. And that's a really excessive acquisition and reluctance to delete any of your electronic material at all. Any answer, and look, I know I've done that too, because as you know, as someone as a go-to, you want to have all of this information and knowledge at the ready, just at your fingertips to go, blah, here you go. But this excessive acquisition, the behavior, for that mass storage of all these digital artifacts, quite often of really unnecessary or irrelevant data that's there now. And so it's a real case of just in cases is why we sort of burn to have these answers. It's real borderline behavior. But, when people have actually stopped asking questions and becoming the font of all the answers instead, we know we have an imbalance. And that's something we need to address.
I agree. I think there's that curiosity piece you're often talking about. That is kind of a word you've used over the last year, constantly saying the more curious we can be, the better we become at learning. I want to move to Kathy. Kathy, what happens when a leader, what are the risks when a leader is unwilling to put on the brakes and say, hey, hold on a minute, we need to ask a few more questions?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, if the leader is one who acts out of fear and consequences to themselves, if they ask the right questions, knowing that they know which questions they need to ask in the situation, things can, I've always come from technical support, and things can blow up. You can really destroy a relationship with a customer. You can send your people into a situation that becomes a battle or a war. So that, living by the philosophy of, do the next right thing, I think we need to encourage culture. And there's, kind of this mismatch between executives and how we think we need to be. We need to have the answers. We need to be on top of everything. We don't want to show weakness. But in reality is we need a culture that encourages that curiosity, that encourages people and rewards people for asking questions so that they can make the right decisions or guide people in the right direction.
I like that. And it's even just with the little small things, isn't it? It's even if we just don't even ask our customer, if we don't teach our frontline people to ask the customer enough questions to get, to the point. Kathy, go ahead.
And I have one more thing about that, is we need leaders who have the passion to ask the questions. Asking questions takes energy. You can skate right along and glaze over things, but we need to have that passion to, that curiosity and that passion to find the information.
What do you think, Kathy, that it would take in order to be able to be good at that? What are the qualities, do you think?
Honestly, I'm a forever curious person. I'm a forever learner, and I am the 2-year-old that asks a million questions. I've always been that way. So I think part of this is built within us, that desire to always want to understand and to, politely challenge or ask the questions until it resonates with me and I am right with the situation. Without having that, I think it's something that leaders really need to work on, or perhaps get some training in, because it's essential to success of the tech support.
So I'd say that was kind of your growth mindset, right? That's that whole growth mindset about moving. And the key to that, because I know you, Kathy, is the listening piece, right?
I forgot to say that. Yes.
Yeah, the whole
Yes.
listening piece. That
seeking to be heard as much is to listen and to understand as well as to be understood.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. Daniel, we haven't heard from you today. I'd love to chat with you. I would love to talk a little bit about questions because you consult with organizations, and primarily your learnings are based on questions, are they not?
Every time somebody asks me a question, I panic, and then I try to figure out what it is that they really want. So, yep, that's correct. That's the definition of a consultant. Ask him
So,
something and he panics.
but isn't it important to build an environment, like Kathy talked about culture, but isn't it important to build an environment where asking questions aren't about trying to figure out the answer they want to hear, but actually feeling safe enough to answer the question honestly?
I think before you, blah, 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 pull the string back in my, out of the back of my back again. Let's try this again. Before you get to the answer part, you need to bring the right attitudes and behavior so that you can create an environment where you can ask and not get shot.
Yes.
So I typically create, or as an IT director or as a CIO, depending on the meeting I was in, I wanted to ask a question and I didn't. I went and found a water cooler moment to try to find a way to ask that question and not have the person, like Kathy was saying or Simone was saying, look at me and go, really? You idiot. We hired you for this? And as a consultant, it gets even worse because you can just get shown to the door. We didn't hire you to ask us questions. We hired you to give us answers. Well, no, what you hired me to do was to help you see whether or not what you wanted to know would matter.
Yeah. And I think that discovery piece.
And I think that's a big, that big discovery piece is a real change in attitude and behavior that brings a different culture up.
I think
I'm sure that Greg has something that he wants to, not Greg, Roy has something that he wants to tag on to that.
Daniel, you made me panic there. It's like, he's asking me a question. I don't have an answer.
Oh, good. I'll go to mute then.
Yeah.
Roy.
I'm totally panicking. So I'll just leave it at that.
Yeah.
But yeah. It's this is slightly a different slant on this discussion, but I remember seeing a statement in a group on LinkedIn at some point, and when it's revolving around customer service, and the person who posted this particular piece said, "Never, ever, 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 ever," which is always a flag, right? Never, ever, ever, or always, always, always. Never, ever, ever say you don't know the answer. And I was just like, boy, is that a bad way to go. And I said, you'll absolutely say that you don't know the answer, but say, I'm going to find out for you. I'm going to do the research. I'll get back to you by such and such a time or such and such a day, whatever it happens to be. So it's fine to not know the answer. It's usually questionable not to know the question. So that's the key, is really figuring out what questions we need to ask to get to the place that we want to figure it out.
Absolutely. I think, I don't know if any of you saw Greg's LinkedIn this week, but there was, I think the opening line was, "You're the smartest in the room," or something similar to that.
In the room.
And we've all been there, right? We've all been in meetings where we've sat through with the smartest person in the room deciding that they have all the answers and simply dictating. And then, like Daniel, you talk about the water cooler. Roy's got the book, The Smartest Guy in the Room. But Daniel, you talk about the water cooler conversations, and oftentimes I have been in meetings, especially in a fear culture, where the big boss comes in, makes a bunch of blanket statements, points a few fingers, has to be the one with all the knowledge, walks out of the room, and then there is this loud blah, 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 hush, right, among everyone after he's left. And then it moves on, and the next 2 hours in the organization are taking up with things like, "Did you hear that?" So Greg, I'm going to pick on you now, because isn't being overly focused on being clear on the question, which is it? Does the answer stifle creativity and innovation, or does the question stifle creativity and innovation? Because I have my opinions on that.
Oh, so there's a wrong answer here, is there?
I'm just asking a question.
It's a good question, and let's be clear about it. Here. So when faced with that, I don't know. This is kind of an older story at this point in time, but have you guys heard about Dick Fosbury, the high jump guy? Little known fact: if you've heard of Dick Fosbury, he was born in Portland, Oregon, not a couple hours north of me, and he went to university at Oregon State University, which is about 10 minutes southwest of me. And he's well known for creating the so-called Fosbury flop. And it goes something like this. Since the dawn of high jump as a modern sport, the accepted method was some form of, you jump over, you spread your legs, where, you're essentially upright. That's just how it was done up until in the 1968 Olympics. And he was perfecting it before that, along with his coach at Oregon State University. But at the 68 Olympics, he won the gold medal, or at least he won the competition. And it was actively debated. That's not legal. That's not right. That's not proper. That's not how you do it. And they consulted the rule books and had a discussion. And it's like, no, the competition is how high of a bar can the human get over? And the Fosbury flop, where he did it on his back, which everybody does now. If you've watched high jump, there's nobody that's not using the Fosbury flop or a modified version of that. So here's the thing. The goal was very, very clear. The question was, how high of a bar can a human get over? And there was very limited rules about that. So being very clear on the objective opened up the possibility of, well, we don't have to do it the way everybody else is doing. We don't have to follow the accepted best practice, or just because everybody else is doing it that way doesn't mean there's a better way. And he not only won the gold medal, but he set a world's record. And after he had competed, he asked to have the bar raised to an ungodly high level. He actually didn't clear that one, but he tried it because he kind of went on record as saying the game has changed. And for the most part, everybody went home in 1968, and the world of high jump has been forever changed. So that's an example to me. And I think about that a lot. I actually wrote an article a couple of years back of when do we innovate, meaning the same thing, only slightly better? And when do we just say, blow it up? It's a new game. We're trying something new. And it comes down to, what is it that you're trying to achieve? What is it that we're trying to effectively do within our organizations? And when we're clear on that, in my mind, that opens up the possibility of innovation.
I love it. I love it.
I get the right answer.
Yeah, because you're focusing on intent and challenge, right? You're focusing on what are we trying to achieve, as opposed to how am I supposed to be doing this within this culture, organization, environment, whatever that looks like. And what are we used to? And are we brave enough, or do we have enough safety to be able to get outside of our comfort zone? Right, Kathy? Like we talked about the water cooler, what kind of happens when you're in a fear organization is that water cooler, right?
Yes. And I loved what Daniel said about going to the water cooler. I didn't like the part about what happened later, that, people tend to, some people tend to go off and, may reshare in a disparaging way what you asked. I think we need the willingness to be vulnerable, to not care about what maybe someone's going to go off and say. We need to be fearless, and we also need to fear less. And at my last organization, I had, my first organization, I was out there 30 years. I knew everybody. At the second organization, I like meeting people from all different areas of the company because it gives me a broad perspective. And I was shocked when I would bring up a name of someone who mentioned something or had an insightful idea, and people would say, who? Nobody in other departments knew each other. So how can you have the big picture if you don't get to know people and know who you can go to ask questions of? But then in that same sense, you have to be willing to be vulnerable, because if they're in another department, you just don't know where it's going to go from there. But if you do that, you're going to get the information that you're seeking if it's not within your team.
Absolutely. And I love how you phrase that. You can be fearless or you can fear less. Daniel, you mentioned something, and I just we're getting close to time, but I really want to jump in about something Daniel put into the chat, and that is about the difference between 2018, 2019, and 2020.
So in 2018 and 2019, if anyone in the organization wanted to do anything with technology, they filled out a business case. They took it to a meeting. Maybe they got it approved. Maybe they got some type of funding or budget that would then allow them to do it. Maybe at some point in time, they started to do something with it. Oh, wait, a priority has now come in. Let me park that. So something else now has bumped it out of the way. And they went through this cycle of maybe. In March 2020, the world changed. Your choices were change the way that we do things, use the internet as our new network, and keep our staff employed and keep our customers as customers. If you did not do that now, April, May, June 2020, you were out of business. How many people want to go back to 2018 and 2019? And how many people have learned that the question is, why didn't we collaborate and communicate with each other like we have been in the past? Okay, or, you know, how can we not go back to our past? How can we collaborate and communicate the way we are now going forward? You know, you keep hearing people go, when will we go back to normal? No. When will you go back to creating a new way of working and thinking and asking and questioning and being curious and doing stuff to drive you forward? I mean, that to me is the question of today for leaders.
I agree. I think the questions coming out of this grand experimentation of 2020 as we move through 2021 is, what are we going to do with this knowledge we're learning? But not everybody asked questions. So Simone, what are some ways we can circumvent or maybe come to some of those answers without actually having a question format, I guess?
Yeah, it's quite interesting. So, you know, basic summary, if X, Y, Z is the answer, we often try to find the questions to fit the answer, right? Rather than understanding the context of the question that we're concerned with. It's interesting. I was always taught to question everything. And then when I had an answer, there were 2 or 3 answers as potentials. So that's something else, is to have this, you know, the option A, B, and C. And those of us that came from the military, we also have option D. You always have it just in cases. It was always, I was always challenged though at all of those options. And I think that's the point of being challenged. But it also asking questions also flew in the face of my training, because it was also don't question authority. Because there's a hierarchy and that there's a ladder, and also too that authority in some ways automatically denoted you were meant to be an expert, you know, because you were in that position of authority. And so, I mean, authority, what would you know? If nothing else, what I have learned in terms of circumventing that is, if nothing else, my career and experience has helped me understand that what you need is new blood. Now, that new blood can be in the form of a new person in your team. That new blood generating and working its way through you could be a new perspective from an experience you've had, or it could be through training or coaching, or it could be a circumstance, as Daniel's talking about, you know, what's happened in 2018 and 19, and then look what's happened in 2020, and it's gone, well, hey, that just shook up the way we saw things. So I think if you can get that shift in context, that really helps us learn. Even if we're not sure what those questions are yet that we need to be asking, it gives us a different, we're standing in a different context, therefore our vision of what we're looking at is different. And so we can find new ways of approaching things. You know, you don't want to be that data junkie. You want to be knowledge wise. You may not know the answer, but if you are, and this is something I used to teach all my support teams, you won't have all the answers. And it is okay to say, I don't know the answer to that one. But as a professional problem solver, I know how to go about getting the answer. And I think that exactly, Greg, is why we have the Fosbury flop. We have this thing, but I'm going to try a new approach, a new context, a new way about trying to find the answer to this. So I think, Patty, right, so back to the beginning of what you had, the quest. The question is the quest of curiosity and allowing ourselves to go down that rabbit hole.
I think it's also a means of trying to understand if we have the right answer, because sometimes we're you know, employees that are given an answer. We want you to do this, and that discovery, that curiosity, the quest is about seeing, is that answer actually correct as well, right? Under the context the rest of us are living in. Roy, are there indicators that can help us understand if we're asking the wrong questions?
For sure. First of all, if nobody understands the question, right? We're asking the wrong question. If everybody goes, what? I used to have a teacher, everybody other than Greg goes, because we're used to that. I had a teacher who used to ask questions as if they were fill in the blanks, but verbally, but he would always leave too many blanks. So, and I remember clearly, this is a physics teacher, and one day he asked a question, what is the distance? The distance from is, and everybody kind of said, where's the question here? What's the question? I don't know what the answer is, because the question is not defined. So yeah, we have to pay attention to how we make the question, how we put the question, and think about the answer we expect, or are we expecting one? Is it a totally random question? And Patty, you mentioned before, you mentioned surveys, and of course you should be pretty good. Everybody should be pretty good at spotting surveys that are pushing them into a particular answer, right? Would you rather have 32 arrows in your back or 41? Okay, maybe I don't want arrows in my back. What's the assumption of the question? Always look for that assumption of the question, and it helps you sort through the options.
I love that. So situational awareness for if you're a leader and your team's eyes are rolling or their heads are down, or paying attention, reading the room can make a big difference in understanding if you're asking the right questions. Greg, have you ever seen the answer shape the question?
Yeah, it's kind of a variation of what we talked about. Let me give you another example. I read about Amazon way early in the Amazon, before we all know and love Jeff Bezos and all that. But they were moving very, very quickly to be an online book retailer, right? And the big talk at that point was, you know, they have every book that's ever been in print, whereas your local bookstore, you browse and they might have it or they might order it, blah, 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 right? But along the way, they invented kind of this e-commerce model and the infrastructure to support their business. And it was very inventive at the time, highly secure, right? And at some point, and I'm sure that it's more a myth or legend than actuality, but some along the way, they realized, holy cow, we have this amazing infrastructure. We're not a technology company. We're a retailer. We sell products. We take product from here and we ship them to there. And so if having this amazing infrastructure is the answer, what's the question? Because we thought the question was, how do we be a very successful business of being a retailer? And so the answer clarified the question. why don't we sell infrastructure services? And that was the birth of Amazon Web Services. They now sell a product that they invented to support their business. And so it doesn't necessarily mean that you get out of a business because now you can buy cloud services. You might have to question your business, right? So the answer informed or helped shape the question about what their very business model was. And I think that's important.
I think there is a lot of that happening in this year. I think that's, who are we really? Are our truths still true? Is this who we really are? And what are we trying to achieve, Greg?
Yeah, so many years ago, I visited the Henry Ford Museum in Dearborn, Michigan. It was a fascinating thing. But what struck me as a technologist the most was there was one of the 6 or 8 generators. And by talking generators, I mean the size of 6 or 8 locomotives. These things were massive, and they were used to generate electricity. They were steam driven to power the Model T and subsequent assembly lines, because there was no commercially available power of that magnitude of reliability. And so they generated their own power to support their business. And there was people that spent their entire career making sure that it was working well and supporting the business and blah, blah, blah. But they don't do that now. Why not? Because the world changed, and that was no longer the answer to the question that they were in business of. And imagine the catastrophic shift in their business model when they said, all right, well, tomorrow we're going to be buying electricity from somebody else and being subject to that, right? So business changes, and our ability to adapt and to really ask ourselves, like, is that true anymore? Is what we've been doing? I mean, Daniel nailed it. I'm going to get him online after this and talk about that. Is like businesses that were running like we used to for the last 25 years were shaken to their core in 2020, because this was do or die. You will not see 2021 as a business if you don't adapt what you're doing to address the clear and present danger that is 2020. But there are organizations that were already doing the 2021 model. And so they were, they struggled just like everybody else, but they had the fundamental mechanisms in place. And so my concern for 21 is, are we asking ourselves as organizations, as professionals in this industry, what are the true lessons that we learned, and how do we incorporate that into us going forward? Not how do we get back to business as usual? That's a brilliant addition, Daniel.
I love that. I love that. And we have, when somebody says Tesla is a car manufacturer, Tesla employees will correct you. I'm sorry, no, we're an energy company. We make cars, but we are an energy company. And that's an interesting look at their desire to change the world in an environmentally differently impacted in the energy world. Simone, you're waving your hands. I got something.
Yeah, I think one of the key things, though, is Greg was talking about that, and he's right. The whole, what is our clear and present focus? What has to happen? And I think one of the words we haven't used today is simplicity. We haven't actually, so I said, moving away from being a data junkie and knowledge-wise, you've got to cut through the gaff. And I think you need to be a very laser focused person to some degree to be able to get rid of that gaff, and want to ensure that you want to keep it very simple in what that mission is supposed to be. It's like pearls and chucks, okay? Pearls are always the question, should I wear my pearls? Chucks, always the answer, because I can run in them all day.
So there is a book called Questions Are the Answer. And I mentioned the author not long ago. His name is Hal Gregerson. He has something he does called question bursts. And I think it's worth learning a little bit about that. You have to identify the intent and the challenge, and then these short question bursts. So to answer your question, Kathy, about how can we do this in a fast way, we can achieve that very quickly by asking ourselves questions about the challenge. And we can do that in group form, in team form, and getting people together in 2-minute and 4-minute bursts, and then theming those and figuring out what our priorities are, what questions are actually leading us to a how for that challenge. It's a great book to try and get your hands on. Anyway, we are close to time. One last thing I'm going to allow Roy to jump in about questions and answers and finish us off for the morning. And I'd like to thank Kathy and Daniel for joining us today as well.
Well, we have had fun. And along the way, one of the questions that we got internally in our little chat was, why did we pick this topic? And of course, it goes back to the number of the episode. It's episode 42. 42 in Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. If you haven't read the book, you should read it. It's funny, it's insightful, it's many things. 42 is the answer to life, the universe, and everything. So just remember that next time somebody says, oh, and I should mention that in fact, for years and years and years and years, astronomers were looking for something, so particular number, a constant that had relationship to the speed at which the universe was expanding. And that's called Hubble's constant. And in fact, it's very close to 42. So maybe Douglas Adams knew something that the rest of us didn't at the time. So that wraps us up. Thanks to everybody, to the Core Four, Patty, Greg, Simone, moi, and also today, Kathy Velboom, Daniel Breston. They're just, and Greg is attempting to point in the correct direction on the gallery view here.
I'm doing the Brady Bunch thing.
You're doing the Brady Bunch thing. And we'll see you again next time here on KTLO, keeping the learning,
They're learning
on.
on.